All right, guys, thank you for tuning in for today's live stream. It's an Ask Me Anything show, but I anticipate that we're probably going to be talking quite a bit about the primary elections. So, since they just happened last night, that's why I kind of changed the schedule around for the live stream this week, because it just seemed more logical to do it the day after the primary election results. So, there's going to be probably a number of things that we're going to be talking about just in regards to what some of the election results from last night would indicate, what things to look for as these late ballots kind of come in and we start to count those too, and just an overall assessment of where things are moving in the state, just based on some of these election results that we just had. Real quick, one thing I'm going to do a little differently at today's show is that if people ask me questions and I need to refer to exactly what the results are, I may occasionally go to my computer here and take a few seconds to do that. I don't usually have those kind of interruptions here when we're in the middle of a live stream, but I want to have the ability to do that in case I need to do it. And so I am going to have the Secretary of State election results up over here on the screen so I can bounce around between them if there's a question that I have based on some of the questions that come through. One of the things, just to remind everybody, is that as you see the comments down below, when I'm working on a comment or trying to answer a comment, it should be posted down below. Hopefully I stay on top of that pretty well here. And so I hope that looks like, or at least you're able to see what I'm trying to respond to, even if I've gone off in some other tangent. The other thing is that if you want me to answer your questions, or at least be able to pick them out of a lot of the comments, frequently when I'm doing these live streams, there's so many comments coming in, it's actually hard for me to find the questions as we're going along. I try to get to as many of them as I can, but if you hit @WeTheGoverned, it'll just be a little bit easier for me to spot your question in between the commentary back and forth. It's great if you have commentary back and forth. I just can't find the question sometimes unless you have some way of breaking it out for me to easily see it. If you're watching this live stream and it's not live anymore, that's okay. That's great. Feel free to share it with others. But I also finished a video today, should be launching it once I'm done here, about my, basically, it was a longer video than I wanted to do, but it was basically my overall analysis of the initial primary election results and kind of what that indicates moving forward. I walked through about 5 of the congressional races, the overall federal Senate race, the executive level races around the state, about 9 of them there. And then I also kind of had some brief takeaways. I didn't really get into the legislative races yet. I'll probably do that next week when we have a little bit more data that comes in. But I did get some basic overviews, and it's okay if we repeat them during the live stream here. But hopefully I did a better job when I laid it out in the video, just a little bit more efficient. But it was way longer than I normally do on my videos, but it seems like post-primary, people are always asking for my reaction, and so that's just kind of my initial reaction video. It should come up pretty soon, and I just have to finish putting in some details in it, so hopefully I'll do that even before I leave the studio today, and it'll probably launch shortly after I'm done with the live stream. But obviously, with the election, the primary election results last night, and as some of these numbers are coming in, in fact, I'll double check right now to see the voter turnout at this point in time. It's up to 24% of the vote, with another, they're saying 545,000 more ballots to count. I'd expect, actually, for us to have a few more ballots than that, just because, again, the post office is hardly efficient, and you know, we found cases where the post office will sit on ballots, and it takes a while for them to actually get sorted and given to the local county. We've had this problem around the state. Not all of it's a conspiracy. Some of it's just simple, basic incompetence, and unfortunately, a declining quality of service associated with the post office lately. Also, there was a number of reports from around the state of ballot drop boxes just being absolutely stuffed the last couple days, to the point that I think it was a little bit problematic in some counties. So we'll just have to see what those results look like as they come in. And I hope all of those of you who are observers out there right now are watching very closely on how things are being done, and just keep an eye on what's happening in your local county offices. Again, many of you know I've been involved in voter integrity issues in the past, usually related to voter roll cleanup. I was involved in that long before it was cool or popular, and there's a lot of work that still needs to be done in our state, and our state's done its best to make it hard to actually do a good job in that area. But for the election turnout at a 24%, 24.65% right now, as we're talking, I would anticipate that if the number of ballots that come in, if they get over about 35%, then at least they're better than the 2016 numbers. And if they break 40%, if they're able to actually get that high, that would be more in line with what the historical presidential primary numbers would look like over the past, say, 20 years or so. If for some reason they get over 50% and they're approaching the 2020 number levels, that would be very surprising. I would not expect that right now, because there's usually kind of a relationship to the number of ballots that they get already, and compared to how many they're going to collect over the next week or so. So, and depending on where things are at, generally these first couple counts are the bigger counts. Looks to me like they've done about 150,000 more ballots since yesterday. My guess is there's some other people that are going to be reporting, let me see if I'm right on this, a little bit later that they haven't necessarily reported yet today. So if they do that, some are going to be reporting tomorrow. And so I would anticipate that by this weekend, the lion's share of whatever ballots left, like the big chunks of it, should be through. And then it's only going to be those really close races that are still up in the air after this. So let's get to your questions. I know a lot of you guys are dropping questions in the queue already, and if I don't get started on this, inevitably I don't keep up. So let's start with the one that's been posted here for a little while, Conservative Thinking Mom. Why did the Election Commission remove the tab at the top of the ballot so you can look it up to verify your vote has been counted? This really concerns me. I don't trust the elections here in Washington. Well, I don't think that you're wrong about not trusting things, but it is certainly worthwhile to be aware that you can log in, and you can log into the website. There's actually a website at the Secretary of State's office, and you can at least see if they've received your ballot. You can also actually see the status of the ballot there by looking at, like, maybe you were one of the handful of people that had your signature rejected, or there was some other problem with the ballot. Usually it just means somebody didn't sign, like there was a blank that nobody signed at all, or for some reason the clear ballot system actually picked up the fact that your signature changed a lot, or maybe it's somebody else's ballot. But regardless, that's something you can still check on. I kind of liked those tabs I used to have as well. What I'd really like to know is if I was to change something, I would love to have the ability for you to go in and verify that they actually counted it the way that you filled it out. That would be pretty cool, but I don't see them ever going down that road, at least not unless we change the way the system works right now. But good point and good question. I love that type of question. Then this next question, a little bit off topic here. Thunderstriker 303, can I ask you something? And the answer is yes, you can. This is an Ask Me Anything event. Is World War III actually happening? Will there be nuclear war? If it is happening, which countries do you think will target to, or will be targeted, I assume? And listen, I mean, there's a lot of craziness going on in the world right now. Anybody study international affairs and to some level of familiarity with what's going on out there. We really just have three basic concerning events going on. There's the stress over the Taiwan Strait, where China wants to take Taiwan back and Taiwan wants to be more independent, and there's saber rattling going on, and China's been building up and doing tests to try to take it back, and maybe there is a lot of concern that there's going to be some potential conflict or confrontation over that, because that would be essentially China testing out whether America would actually be willing to defend Taiwan. And as somebody, I've traveled to Taiwan many times, and China actually back years ago, quite a bit, when I used to work in manufacturing and sourcing over there. So that's one big flashpoint. That the obvious Ukraine-Russia drama that's been unfolding, the war that's going on over there, and then you've got the Middle East chaos around Israel and Iran and all the other stuff that's piled into that area. And all these things are scary. and concerning, and particularly if it's easy to see when you have clowns in government how they could make terrible choices and bad decisions that could lead to just horrific outcomes. And nobody should want, and I would hope that nobody watching this video would want, a completely unnecessary and pointless conflict that could be avoided. War is a very destructive outcome, and got a lot of family members that have been in the military. My daughter's currently at the Air Force Academy. I'm pretty aware of this stuff, but just tracking what's going on, we'll have to see. Now, the concern is always when you have nuclear-armed countries that you could have some nuclear exchange. I think the biggest concern right now, practically, is just an exchange of maybe a limited nuclear conflict, but some nuclear event between Iran and Israel, or using a proxy in Israel. That would be a terrifying thing to think of, because you inevitably would have some a mutual level of horrible destruction over there. You also have the potential, if you've been paying attention to India's confrontation and concerns over China and India and Pakistan, and all these countries have nukes now. There's nothing good that potentially comes out of that. So that's where I'd be more concerned about some of that stuff. I'm also concerned about weak and petty and selfish and narcissistic sociopaths that are in government who decide that their political future is potentially at risk, and so they're ginning up a type of conflict to distract from their own incompetence or their financial problems they have at home. This has been a concern for China observers for a while too. Always something to be aware of and pay attention to, and that's why you want sane people in government, which we don't have enough of today. Rintin Tech. Hey, I saw you at Joe Kent's party last night, election party. I was there. That's true. Down at the Prairie Tavern down there in Bush Prairie, just north of Vancouver, and wanted to stop by and introduce myself, but got hung up chatting with people, and it looked like the same for you. I'm Joe's videographer, big fan. Well, thank you so much for making a point. Sorry we didn't get a chance to chat there. There was a decent number of people there. And as always, if I go to these events, I always run into people I know, and then I'm a chatterbox, so I get caught up in conversations. But never feel bad. Come on up, interrupt me, say hi. Always appreciate it, especially if you're a fan of the show. And I hope that I'm as approachable in real life as I think I appear to be when you watch me on the video, but and I love talking to people and just getting their feedback. So I do recommend people, especially if you want to get involved in the political process. Most political campaigns will have some kind of election night party somewhere, and if you want to get like a better sense of what it feels like to be around a political campaign, it's a great time. Usually they're fairly open house. You can go there, go to those events, or you can go to a combination event that I know they do sometimes in King and Pierce and Whatcom, and probably in Clark and Spokane, these other places where they'll have. It's a little bit more casual, down to earth. You get a chance to meet a lot of other people. You can meet some of the candidates themselves. Maybe they're crying in their beer because they didn't do well, or they're happy in their celebration because they did do well. But either way, it's not a bad kind of opportunity if you want to just get a sense of what it's like to be there. I don't actually always go to these events. And last night, the Joe Kent event, since I'm in the 3rd Congressional District, it was an hour and a half from my house, but I figured, what the heck. I hadn't been at one of these on a primary night in a while. I usually had gone to some local ones in the past, in the last, say, 6 or 7 years, but I figured I'd drive down to this one and just see how it was going. The 3rd Congressional District, as I've discussed before, and it's gotten a lot of media attention over time, is considered one of the biggest congressional races just in general that has a potential to flip. Right now it's a Democrat in there, and Joe Kent's a Republican running, and so it's considered one of the most likely seats to be in play. And what that means really is that both Republican and Democrat, either PACs or the party or individuals are just going to dump a ton of money now that it's very clear what the primary holds moving forward. So good to see you there. Sorry we didn't get a chance to chat. Thanks for the comment. Alex Brown, you got a question here on Serrano being the leading candidate in the Attorney General's office. What do you think it'll be like with him as AG and Ferguson as governor? It's a pretty funny dynamic to me. Well, that would be great. I would love to have Serrano in there as Attorney General. What I will point out is, although he did come out as a leading vote getter in the AG's race, and I did talk about this a little bit in my video, and Nick Brown is kind of expected. There is a Democrat who will be facing him on the November ballot. However, Moncadingra was the other Democrat candidate in that race, and the reason why Pete Serrano is clearly first is that those two Democrats were duking it out in the primary, and Moncadingra was the crazier of the two, or at least the more openly crazy of the two Democrats, and so her losing is a good thing for sanity and the future of our state. But that being said, Nick Brown is probably still considered the front runner in that race, and Serrano is going to be considered the guy that's still the challenger, even though there are no incumbents right now. So the certainty of him being there as AG is not there yet. You got quite a few months to go, and a lot of work to have a little different voter turnout profile in that race than what we've seen just recently. Jeremy Jennings got a question here, and I'm assuming this is about the 4th Congressional District. Did Jared win? And winning in a top 2 primary system, what that really means is that you've been able to get enough votes that you're one of the top 2 vote getters. And so therefore you move on to the general election. Just as we're talking here, I might as well look up these numbers exactly as we're speaking. So on the congressional side of things, in the 4th, which is kind of that middle conservative district. There's 2 very conservative Republican congressional districts in eastern Washington. The 5th is the one that's over by Spokane. The 4th is kind of middle of the district, includes Yakima, Tri-Cities, that kind of area. And Jared Sessler is at 31%, and he is leading, actually, and the other Republican, so this is going to be one of those races where there are 2 Republicans that are coming through to the general election. No matter what happens in the 4th Congressional District, there's still going to be a Republican in Congress, which is one of the reasons why it doesn't tend to get the same kind of attention as, say, the 3rd Congressional District, which is going to be a definite fight between the incumbent Democrat and Joe Kent, the Republican challenger. It's obviously a big focus just because of the potential of shifting of power. And right now in Congress, the Republicans have a super narrow majority. So all these races are going to matter to him quite a bit. This is not one of those races now. Republican Jared Sessler is going to be challenging incumbent Dan Newhouse, who Dan Newhouse right now has about 24% of the vote, which is actually a shockingly low percentage to get in a top 2 primary as the incumbent, although he had something very similar happen to him 2 years ago as well. And remember, Dan Newhouse really has kind of national attention because he's the last Republican who voted to impeach Donald Trump left in Congress. The others either were defeated or they retired. And so he's literally the last one there. And so my sense is that although probably the traditional Republican establishment, I would presume that they don't get too involved in this race because it's not going to affect their balance of power in Washington, D.C., blue team, red team kind of thing. However, Trump-aligned super PACs or anti-Trump super PACs, I could totally see both of them playing in this race merely for the opportunity to either ensure that Newhouse stays in the race or to ensure that he's bailed. Most likely, Dan is Congressman Newhouse there is going to be looking to gather as many of the Democrat votes in that district. That's a very Republican district, so you're only talking about 33% or so of the voters in that district, and Newhouse is going to try to get them to vote for him, and then get whatever small segment of the Republican Party that he gets. And Sessler's going to have to try to overcome that in the general election. That's the obvious outcome that we're looking at there right now. One of the things in that particular race, and I mentioned this a little bit in my video, but Newhouse and Tiffany Smiley was the other Republican who was running. Tiffany really was aggressive at attacking Newhouse, and Newhouse was really aggressive attacking back. And rightly so. I think he recognized that she was the threat to his ability to even get out of the primary. And so the Sessler vote, which is 31%, and the Tiffany Smiley vote, which is about 19%, it looks like, you're talking about 50% of the total vote between the two of them is clearly anti-Newhouse votes. And then there were a lot of people running that race, a number of small vote getters that were Democrats. But how this vote shakes out, I mean, if I was Newhouse, I'd be, of course, he has a bunch of money, so, and Sessler does not have a lot of money, although I imagine that'll change after this, now the primary is mostly done. But that's the battle. Mostly the conservatives and the pro-Trump wing of the party in particular out there is going to be right behind Sessler. And so Newhouse is definitely fighting for his life going into the general. But winning at this point in time doesn't mean anything other than the fact that it means you advance to the general in November. Thunderstriker, also, why might Shapiro face challenges in Wisconsin compared to Michigan or Minnesota, given the differences in their Muslim populations? Well, I think what you're referring to is the governor, Governor Shapiro out of Pennsylvania, who was not picked to be the vice president for the Democrat presidential appointee, Kamala Harris. Now that Biden's they've decided to throw out the primary results, kick Biden to the curb, and have Kamala Harris run in his stead. And she chose Governor Walz out of Minnesota rather than Governor Shapiro out of Pennsylvania. So I don't know. I haven't really gamed out what Shapiro's going to do and why it would matter, because I just think that the anti-Israel wing, really, of the Democrat Party didn't like Shapiro, and so they threw him to the curb and canceled him out behind the scenes, which really probably helped the Republicans at the federal level, just because what they've really done is they've made a much more extreme ticket, the combo ticket between Walz and Kamala going into the general election, than would normally be considered logical. Yeah, I don't know how much a vice president really helps a presidential ticket. Mostly they have the potential to hurt if you make a bad choice. I'm not sure how much it helps you, but it's a weird year, and as the very fact that Kamala is even on the ballot this cycle, or at least looks like she will be, as the vice president, is indicative of how important sometimes these choices and decisions are made, even though the original decision for vice president usually is very short-sighted, and oftentimes there's a Peter principle there where they try to put somebody in that isn't going to overshadow the person who's president. So we'll see how that goes. Let's see. Nellie, you got a question here. The SOS website says the statewide results will be available August 23rd. Is that normal? It seems way too long. No, welcome to Washington. And when they say that, actually, I believe that's a certification date. Let's see. I believe that I'm correct that is a certification date. It might be a couple days later. I just don't have that right in front of me, and I'm not going to spend my time looking that one up. But I believe that that's pretty typical. What happens is a ton of people dump their ballots either in the post office the last 3 days or at these drop boxes in various locations. And whatever the post office doesn't lose or misplace will eventually be arriving at the Secretary of State's or the various auditors' offices, the 39 counties. And the big rush is usually what comes in on Election Day itself for the drop box situations, and also the next couple days for the early mail. And then the more incompetent elements of the post office squander around trying to, they flounder around with whatever ballots they forgot to deliver from the Renton post office, or, stuck on a ferry coming out of San Juan's or wherever it is. And so that stuff is what kind of trickles in. But the big push is right now. So I would expect that it's one of the reasons why you can do a reasonable calculation of what the final turnout numbers are going to be based on what they see tonight, or I should say last night. There's you can extrapolate it out within a certain percentage, but unless you have just unusual spikes in last minute turn-ins, which we might. So we'll have to see. But that is pretty normal. Welcome to all mail-in voting, and more importantly, welcome to all mail-in voting that allows you to mail it on Election Day instead of arrive by Election Day. Very different policy there, and it could be a big deal. Andrea Kay got a question right here. What are your thoughts on Semi not endorsing Reichert because his values and beliefs don't match with his own whatsoever? Puzzling and a little petty, in my opinion. Well, I heard that Semi did say that when he was interviewed. I'm hoping he kind of changes his mind on that a little bit. And here's why. I mean, I think it's very easy and understandable to understand. And if you haven't been on the ballot before, to know what it's like to go through the drama of years, months, and sometimes years of campaigning, organizing your whole life around this, and then failing, right, losing on election night, in his case in the primary, It's devastating, right? Especially devastating if you've had a pretty contentious cycle, which he did have, and a very kind of when you're just fighting over stuff more, especially internally, then it's easy to be disappointed, demoralized, angry, frustrated, and upset, and pretty emotional. It's usually not a good plan to just attack the people on your own side after an election. But the media purposely will come up and try to interview you right after your election to get your responses. And I'm hoping that he sleeps on that and comes around and changes. There's clearly a big difference between Ferguson, and pretty much any other human in Washington State. It's hard to actually find a worse person than Ferguson to put in the governor's race. So honestly, your average meth addict you pull off the street would be a much better person in there. So to not endorse Reichert at this point in time, considering the situation you're in, it just doesn't seem very. It just seems like you're throwing a temper tantrum, and that's going to be the way it comes across to a lot of people. And so I'm hoping that he's willing to, change his mind on that. I'm going to point out there was a contentious primary in a couple of these other races as well, Republican on Republican. And in most cases, it looks like they generally, when things didn't go their way, in the 3rd Congressional District, for example, you had Leslie Wellen, who, was beat substantially by Joe Kent for the Congressional District, and she immediately came out and endorsed Joe after the race. And to her credit, too, she didn't do an aggressive negative campaign at the end. I mean, a lot of times, if you're doing polling at all and you're tracking where your race is and you're just realistic about where you actually stand in the race, the last thing you probably want to do is just lash out at everybody on the way out to losing, because it minimizes your potential to run for office in the future. And actually, I thought that what Leslie did was she did do a lot of mailers, but she was not doing them as an intramural Republican on Republican fight. Which does kind of keep the door open for her for another political action, effort and another shot down the road. Usually, if you lose more than 3 times, kind of the rule of thumb is your 3rd race is kind of over after you've lost. If you're a perennial candidate after that, pretty much nobody's ever going to take you seriously again. It's very difficult anyway. Also, there's a typical profile of candidates who try to run for an office way beyond where their real capacity is to prevail on the campaign. Doesn't mean they can't do the position. It just means that their ability to campaign for that position is pretty low with any degree of success. And so a lot of times it's very difficult for people to kind of recalibrate the race that they're running for and run for a race that they have a better chance of prevailing at. And that's just very hard. Now, this is just human nature, and that's all you're talking about is people who have emotions and baggage and, drama, and you don't know what's happened to them behind the scenes. There's people who are much easier to be offended. There's a lot of issues like that. So we'll just see what he does. In the end, it's up to Semi. Nobody can really you can't do what you want. You can't make him do what you want him to do. It's up to him. He gets his own choices. And it's not uncommon, though, immediately the night of the election to be pretty angry or annoyed or frustrated or upset about that. I know what that's like. And I've seen it many, many times before. So anyway, Karen Kyle just got here. What are the numbers for Semi? Well, let's look at the state executive race and the governor's race right now. And the only reason I'm doing this is a couple counties are updating their numbers right now. So Semi Bird right now has 9.9% of the vote. And let's see, Reichert has about 28% of the vote, and Bob Ferguson has 45% of the vote. Interestingly enough, Bob Ferguson's percentage keeps going down. Mark Mullet got about 5.89% of the vote. Those are the top 4. And I'd like to know I don't know who the heck was voting for this Cassandra Magdalene Hansen. She got 16,000 votes at 1.3% of the vote as a Democrat out of Spokane, and I caught her political campaign just completely I filed a complaint against her, and it's still being investigated by the Public Disclosure Commission, but it was like egregiously, flagrantly dishonest and corrupt. So I don't know how anybody would vote for, judging from that. But nevertheless, there was 28 people. 2 people are coming through. It's Bob Ferguson and Reichel at this point in time. So, typically if you were to add up the Reichel, Mark Mullet, and Bob and Semi Bird's votes together, it actually looks like the Republicans have a chance based on these numbers. And again, these turnout models are a lot smaller than what they're going to be in the general, but it does look like the Republicans have a pretty good chance. 45% for Bob Ferguson, who has more money than everyone else combined, and who's got 12 years in public office and the ability to bribe people with chicken tuna checks and all the other corruption schemes that he has under his belt. It's a shockingly poor performance for Bob Ferguson. So that creates an opportunity for the Republicans to at least change the game for the first time in 50 years, maybe, for 40 some odd years anyway at this point in time. So that would be a big deal, but we'll have to see. Let's see, Oakwell, I just want to tell you how much your hard work is very much appreciated. Thank you. Love it. I'll try to get some questions here. Always appreciate the kind words, though. Grayman, 6734, do you believe Freemasons have a disproportionately large influence in local, state, and federal politics? To be honest with you, I don't have too much of an opinion on that. I'm not actually sure if I know a Freemason. I'm not aware of any, actually. I'm sure I've met somebody that's a Freemason, but it's nobody I can think of. So I think people do tend to look for conspiracies or other situations like that behind the scenes, whether or not they exist. And sometimes I don't think it's always there, but so I don't have much of an opinion on that question. But thank you for asking. Christian Burns, Congressional District 2 candidate Cody Hart came in second. Have you heard about his petition for impeachment against Bob Ferguson? The Washington House reps are aware of it. Yeah, I saw that Cody Hart made it through. Let me look at that race because it is kind of worth just mentioning that one. It was one of the races I didn't really focus too much on because Cody Hart got 20% of the vote. Rick Larson got 49% of the votes, the incumbent congressman, and this is in the second congressional district, kind of Whatcom County, Skagit County loop up there. But it was a really crowded primary. Included like Josh Binda, who was one of the council members that I've gotten in trouble many, many times with the Public Disclosure Commission in the past as a Democrat. You had a Green Party person. In fact, it was mostly Democrats running. And you had a couple of Republicans, but Cody kind of came out of the scrum ahead. Cody doesn't really have too much of a chance there in that race. At least you wouldn't look at this race and think that there's much of a chance there, because you're really looking at about 34% Republican vote, judging from the primary results, and historically that's just not going to be enough to translate, even if you substantially increase the turnout in the final election. But it does mean that Rick Larson and Cody Hart get to go head-to-head. But Rick Larson's just going to probably ignore him, and that's usually what they do in those races. Interestingly enough, relevant to this, the 5 districts where it's not really where it doesn't seem like Republicans can prevail, they at least have a Republican candidate versus, opposed to the Democrat, as opposed to a top 2 Democrat on Democrat outcome, which has happened many times in the past when it shouldn't. So that's a good thing from at least voters having an opportunity to have a choice. Remember, the biggest thing I suspect that's going to drive a normally uninterested voting population, some segment of the apathetic middle, to come out and vote is going to be these initiatives on the ballot. There are 4 of them. Vote yes, pay less. Not hard to figure out. If you live in Whatcom County, there's actually 5 of them, because you have an initiative up there to repeal a stupid and insane property tax that was just barely, narrowly voted in recently. So I suspect that combination of, you may hate all the politicians, you may not like the parties, you may not believe your vote counts that much, but some percentage of those people are still going to come in and vote just on the initiatives. And Washington State has a long and storied history of voting for crazy clowns for government, and at the same time, good tax-cutting policies. So this could be a substantial impact in the turnout and the model that is actually, it's kind of difficult to model exactly of what the elections in November are going to look like versus what you just saw last night. Going back, you had another question, petition for impeachment. I have seen that. I don't know. I honestly don't feel like there's a lot of legal teeth in that petition. I've never seen one like this work. I am unaware of any attorneys who think it works right now, so I don't have a lot of confidence that that's going to produce an outcome that people want it to. But of course, anything that annoys Bob Ferguson usually makes me smile. Thunderstriker back again with another question. Why does the RNC often schedule its convention before the DNC? Isn't it better to have it closer to the election? Or do you think the convention hype doesn't make a difference? There's always a convention hype bonus. There's a bump in the polls for, whatever they're worth, for each respective party, usually when they have their convention. I actually thought, maybe I'm wrong about this, somebody can correct me too if I'm wrong, but I was under the impression that the parties switch back and forth. Some, 1 year they'll have it later, the next year the other one will. I thought that's how they work it. Maybe I'm totally wrong about that, and that implies a level of coordination that doesn't exist out there. But the one benefit of having an earlier primary is, yes, you don't get the post-convention bump, but you have more time to actually go out there and campaign with the certainty that your candidates have been chosen, clarified, and confirmed. So that is a benefit. The Democrats got the benefit this time of at least not having, if they had gone to their convention and formally approved Biden before they decided to uninformally, remove him, with that threat of the 25th Amendment behind the scenes, we'll just see what happens. But anyway, so that's they always hype these conventions. And of course, the media is exceptionally dishonest in how they cover these conventions, as they always have. I think that the Democrats are going to have a weird convention just because of the fact that they're basically they've ignored their entire primary process on the presidential side, and somehow you're supposed to believe that they care about what their rank and file think, and I don't think they care at all right now. This is a total insider's game, so going to the convention is going to be very important for them, probably as important as any convention's been for them since 1968. Which, if you go back and look at your history, was hardly a great convention for the Democrats. And we'll see how it goes, but it's going to be a bit of chaos. Hey, listen, we're all on the same page on this. I'd love to see the ability to verify how I actually voted, how they counted my vote. That's what I'm curious about. But again, there is a legal way you could probably do that, but they would really fight it tooth and nail, right? It's the last thing they ever want. John, you mentioned you never got a voter pamphlet. Sorry, you're not alone. Welcome to how part of that's going to be probably a post office thing. Generally, I'm under the impression the way that's mailed out, that they send it to everybody, but the post office doesn't necessarily deliver it to everybody. So, Sammy, Bird got robbed. Well, listen, one thing I'm going to point out, and I'm sure that you aren't the only person that feels that way out there, a lot of things happen in politics. They do, and I have seen this firsthand for 15 years in Washington State, back when I was a activist in college, when I worked on political campaigns back then. I've seen all this kind of stuff comes up all the time. And so I think in this case, you can't look at how the election results went and say that Semi had more votes than what he looks like he got. He will be getting more votes, as will all those candidates, as the rest of the ballots come in. I think he did a good job coming without a lot of funding, and considering some of the drama that he had to deal with. The party's endorsement in his case didn't help him as much as he may have wanted, or as people thought it would. There was a real question this cycle, because it's the first time the party's ever done these endorsements, and clearly Byrd got the endorsement of the convention delegates that were there. I was there, and there is no doubt about it. He had the majority of the delegates by a long ways there at the state convention, and he got the nomination. But by itself, that wasn't enough to get over the finish line. I will also point out that there were about 12 different surveys that were done, and the results that we're seeing match, not completely, he actually slightly underperformed, but they match roughly what the numbers are that we see right now. They can never really take into account all these other people that are on the ballot, so they aren't going to be perfectly in line, but it roughly matches what we see there. And we're going to be looking at these numbers quite a bit afterwards. I'm assuming I'm not the only one that'll do that, and break it down by precinct once the precinct data comes out and get a sense of distribution on where those voters, especially the anti-Ferguson voters, are. Remember, basically, since you have two front runners right now for the governor's race, we can complain and talk about process and arguments within our party later on if we want, but the bigger question is, can Ferguson be stopped, right, with his bribery, with his corruption, with just the evil intent that he seems to represent? That's a little bit harder question. Then this is a common theme again on some of these questions that have come up. Do you think if Semi Bird does not endorse Reichert, it could cost him? It generally just costs you some of your friends. In the politics, especially if you lose in a primary, that's a partisan primary, it's generally good form and indicates a level of humility and stuff to endorse the people that you just were bitterly fighting. We've seen at the presidential level, anybody that supported Trump and saw a lot of the people like I was, during the 2016 election, I wasn't a Trump guy. I was in favor of Ted Cruz. I was a Ted Cruz guy. I'd been a Ted Cruz guy since before Trump got in the race. And Ted Cruz and Trump were pretty bitter there at the end, right? And it was pretty crazy at the end of the 2016 election. But in the end, Ted Cruz came out and endorsed Trump despite the bitterness and the fighting. It's maybe a bitter pill to swallow. Maybe behind the scenes you don't like the guy. I mean, that stuff happens all the time. Don't think these people who endorse each other love each other. Sometimes there's other reasons why they're doing those endorsements. But if you are not endorsing and you're kind of bitter about it, what it does is it reflects poorly on you. It doesn't reflect poorly on the person you don't endorse. And it generally means that you're just in favor of Ferguson in this case. I mean, that's essentially the only thing you're doing is helping Ferguson. And I don't think that helps Semi, who probably has a future of doing something else if he wants to in the political process. It makes that future very difficult because you're alienating potential allies in the future. It's hard for people to understand this in politics, I think, sometimes, just because of the way the bitterness and intensity and emotional drama and baggage, and it's your name on the ballot. It's not like it's this disconnected kind of thing. I mean, it's really you're people making a judgment on you. It's hard. My name's been on the ballot 3 times. I know what that's like. Well, 4 times. I know what that's like. And it feels good when you win, and it sucks when you lose, and you get an emotional reaction. Inevitably, everybody does. But the primary is different than the general quite a bit. So anyway, I just think people have to be aware of that. Let's see. There's a question here. Ultimately, by the way, that's going to be Bird's decision. Yeah, I can't change his mind. You can't change his mind. That's just his choice. He gets to decide how he wants to be remembered and how he wants to deal with the situation moving on. Did fears about Kamala becoming vice president impact the markets? I don't know, but I mean, people always speculate that. You'll want to say that. If you don't like Kamala, then you're going to say that, her weirdness and strangeness is the reason why. And the threat that she could potentially, be in charge would scare everybody, and nobody wants that. So that might be something that you do see. I don't know for sure. Everybody's going to have their own theory. It kind of makes sense to me, but I also think you've got significant geopolitical concerns all around the world, particularly in the Middle East right now. But you got issues in, like I mentioned earlier in the video, with Taiwan. You got issues with saber-rattling with China and Taiwan. I'm always a little concerned when India and China start arguing back and forth because of the Bangladeshi situation. And it's when you see what's happening in Ukraine, where they just went into Kursk, and Russia's getting angry about that, and there's chaos out there. And when it's risky, people usually start to cut back on their investments, and they get more conservative. There are some people mentioning there's been messages either retracted or deleted. It's not me doing it, just in case you think that I'm doing it. I'm not doing it. Anyway, so we'll see what's happening there. Hey, Glenn, what's your thoughts on Tim Walz VP pick? He has a lot of baggage. Twin City riots, COVID money, stolen wired military history. Yeah, I think you mean he has a it's not so much wired. I don't know why you say wired there, but he definitely has a history in the military that doesn't look good in regards to, it appears, if the reports are accurate, that he abandoned his guys and they had to go to Iraq and he didn't, and then he lied about the actual military rank that he had achieved and all that. But as a governor, he has been horrible. He is just a nasty piece of work. So I'm a little surprised. Again, it still stuns me because I'm used to Republicans doing exceptionally stupid and dumb things. It seems to be wired into the political process for Republicans. Snatching defeat from the jaws of victory is a common action and behavior that Republicans like to do at all times, and I've seen it happen so many times up front, it doesn't surprise me anymore. Usually the Democrats have serious people behind the scenes. They may have clowns running for office, and they may have a lot of corrupt people around them stealing money and ripping them off. But generally, and there's a lot of kickback schemes that tend to circle around the party that has control of the government. But there are serious people in there who do occasionally control the crazies. And usually the point of a VP is to help the presidential candidate, not to make it worse. In this case, it seems like they made it worse. So find the right passion, Burditt's enforcement. I'm assuming you're talking about the Public Disclosure Commission. And he does have some problems with the PDC. He's not alone. But that's not the biggest probably issue that he's facing right now. And listen, it sucks if you lose an election or you get bounced out. There's nothing fun about that. Bird started early, which is the right thing to do if you're going to run for office. Start early and lay the foundation. It's tough to be in those situations. Let's see, Jack Paulauder, you do realize a particular bot is asking AI-generated questions, almost like you're being interviewed for a job. Very annoying. Yeah, there could be, and I'm sure there's bots that come in on the questions all the time. Let's see, do you think Kent is going to be able to beat Perez this time? That's a good question. The 3rd Congressional District, that's going to be the big question. Nationally, it is a Republican plus 3 to 5, right, somewhere in that area district. It is considered Republican leaning. It's going to vote for Trump most likely. And so if I was, in Glusenkamp Perez's situation, I mean, that's a tough battle. You're in a tough fight. She knew it from the beginning. Everybody knows it. Every poll that's ever been done in the district and all the national stories that focus on the 3rd Congressional District in Washington State recognize it as a major battleground district. So massive amounts of money are going to be dumped in there. The only question is who executes the better part on the ground. What are the trends that, frankly, the campaigns probably can't change anything about? The initiatives are going to generate a different profile of voter, probably at some percentage margin that could have a different impact, probably, most likely, in the favor of Kent. The one thing about Perez there, Glusenkamp Perez, right, is she has done, at least verbally, try to distance herself from some of the chaos in D.C. I don't know how much that helps or hurts her, really, in this race because the partisan lines tend to get drawn in these congressional races, and the crossover effect is pretty limited. But we'll see. Turnout's going to matter, et cetera, so we'll just have to see. For the right passion, find the right passion, sorry. If the new county commissioner turns out to be really bad, can we do a recall or write-in the finals in November? Thank you. Okay, so you're talking about two different things. And we're saying commissioner, county commissioner. I don't know if that, it really depends. I'm assuming that means that you have got a county commissioner. If there's 2 people running, sure, you could do a write-in. It's a waste of time, most likely. Most counties, unless you have a real small one and a massively funded operation for a write-in campaign, you can rarely get through. We've had examples of write-in campaigns that were successful, but they fit a different profile. If filing week comes around in May and it turns out there's only one person running for that office, you can do a write-in campaign for the primary, and you really only have to get 1.5% of the vote to have that write-in campaign mean that your campaign shifts from a write-in during the primary to a on the ballot in the general. In fact, Rob Chase, who just came out of the primary in one of the ledge districts over in Spokane, his original foray into the political world was a write-in campaign for the county treasurer, and that's how he became treasurer ultimately. Similarly, that's how Smith, down in running for Congress back in the day, 1994, also became a candidate for Congress and won. Similarly, that's how Sharon Hannock in 2012 did a write-in statewide, which has never happened before, and was able to get enough write-in votes that she got on the general ballot in 2012 for the state treasurer race. She, by the way, is now running on the ballot because she knows how much harder it is to run a write-in campaign in the primary. She is on the ballot for the state treasurer race here in November. Just 2 of them are there, so with Pellicati being the incumbent. And so write-ins can work, but there are limited circumstances. Camas had an amazing write-in where they actually flat out wrote in a city and won at the mayor's race and almost won a couple of their city council races. That was a few years ago. I don't remember exactly the election year for the one in Camas. One thing I'll point out, though, is that you can do that easier in a smaller election jurisdiction than you could in a bigger race. Counties are a little bit bigger and harder, depending on which county you're talking about. Recalls are much more difficult and require malfeasance, misfeasance, or violation of oath of office. And rarely do I ever see the courts, because it requires 2 levels of judicial review. I've never seen the courts uphold an oath of office violation very clearly. And malfeasance and misfeasance, the bar is still set fairly high. It is a lot of work, and you still have to go back through quite a few processes. Usually I would say that if you don't like the county commissioner, start recruiting somebody now to come in and replace them in a few years. If you start 2 years in advance, you got a much better chance of prepping and laying the groundwork for a good candidate to go in and win. So Rye Guy 1218. What does worry me about Washington 3rd was a bunch of people from Portland moving in and bringing their politics with them. Sure, that definitely worries all of us. I'm in the 3rd district, but I'm way up on the north end of it in South Thurston. That's a problem, but I'm telling you that the 3rd Congressional District has become more Republican every cycle now for the last, 12 years, give or take, 14 years, I think the trend has been going on. It just gradually has been shifting that way. So there may very well be people coming over from Portland, but it looks like there are more refugees from Oregon who tend to vote Republican than it is any other way. And you've just had a shift, especially in Pacific, even in Lewis and Cowlitz counties in particular, and some of that rural band in Clark, where people who were otherwise kind of Union Democrats have just seemed to shift over and become Republican voters, as much as partisan affiliation anyway seems to be reflected in the election process. Newhouse certainly does support sending money to Ukraine. That's absolutely true. But what probably got Newhouse's name on or what's really annoyed his base probably the most in the 4th district, truly, is his impeachment vote against Trump. He's done a good job reaching out to agriculture in that area. I'm just fairly familiar with some of the farmers out there. And so that's really his last little anchor to anybody on the nominally Republican side. He was formerly involved in the agriculture department in Washington State, but that impeachment vote that he took against Trump, you can't deny it or pretend like it's not real. It hit him hard, and he's lost a lot of support. And he is the most vulnerable incumbent in a Republican-safe district that I'm aware of in the country right now. Let's see. A lot of people have moved to Idaho from Washington as well. That's true, including some libs I know that moved out of Olympia and live now in Idaho. And I've noticed some of them popping up on the political world scene over there. Very lefty-leaning libs trying to destroy Idaho and do terrible things over there. So that doesn't surprise me. Bryce Carter here, another comment. Mad props to Pete Serrano. Hopefully he can keep the ball rolling. I've not heard much about his opponent. Is he worse than Sideshow Bob? Good question, actually. And Nick Brown doesn't have enough of a history for us to be sure exactly how bad he will be or would be if he's allowed to be in by the voters to be in the Attorney General's office. He just doesn't have that kind of a history. When he was actually a Survivor contestant in 2001, and I played part of that clip in the video when he got booted off the island, the argument of his fellow Survivor people said that he was lazy and only cared about himself, but that would be an analysis that would apply to most politicians. He was endorsed and supported by Inslee, but in a way I think he was pulled out of the AG's Department of Justice side of things at the federal level. He's pulled out of that to run for this position because the Democrats hated Moncadingra, and Moncadingra was the lead Democrat candidate in that race until yesterday. So, or at least there was this perception that she might have been. Nick Brown jumping in brought a lot of Democrat support on his side, and so you had two wings of the Democrat Party fighting each other, and Monk and Dingler lost. Now, she might have been worse than Ferguson if she got in. Nick Brown is just still kind of an empty book, right? Sometimes, given the choice, I'd rather have a lazy loser politician in there than an aggressive, crazy, mean one, right? And so this is sometimes the difference, but we'll see. I'd really rather have Serrano in there, and for the first time in many years, get somebody in there who actually believes the Constitution is real and English is a real language and understands how to read it. But we'll see. Karen Kyle, if Bob Ferguson wins, we'll have to move to Idaho. If we have another pandemic, we're in big trouble. Well, if Bob Ferguson wins, there's a lot of problems. The one thing I will point out is moving to Idaho won't protect you or save you, because judging from the clowns that I've watched over in Idaho lately, I'm a little concerned about where they're going politically. And they have R's next to their name, and they are incompetent idiots at times. So it'd be nice if they weren't, but that's what I'm seeing happen over there too. I think you get a lot of people who are just sleepy and think that because things have been a certain way all the time, that it'll always be that way. And people lie about their party affiliation or what they actually believe in order to get into power. And it happens in our state, happens in Idaho. And I think that you're going to discover that if you actually move over there. I know some friends of mine are over there discovering it right now. Let's see. Here's a question. Gingerella. What I'd really like to know is, how do you think the Marysville School District is going to be, or going to fare after the elections? It appears to be crashing and burning. We're thinking of moving districts. Well, you'd be wise to move districts in that case, because the Marysville School District is essentially bankrupt. They don't really totally have the ability to completely bankrupt. I mean, what really ends up happening is the state steps in, which it's involved in right now, and is trying to intervene in a series of bad and horrible choices that Marysville made in the past. Biggest problem Marysville made was they never had any prudency when it came to managing their funds. So the school district has done repeatedly bad things. Even when I was at the Freedom Foundation 15 years ago, Marysville was like one of the worst districts when it came to negotiating employee contracts. They always gave try money, like it was going out of style and stuff. And so the voters had a lot of their tax dollars squandered there for no return to for any improvements with the schools. So I don't know what's going to, happen there, but it does look like they're on their way out. Let's see. I'm going to skip down here to a couple things here. Let's see. There's another question. Sorry, there's a series of questions here, and I don't want to lose these, especially as I'm getting down towards the end. And there were a number of questions coming down, and I don't want to miss too many of them anyway. Let's see. Really wish I can come to see you in Washington. Next event, still stuck in Arizona. Luckily, I'll be traveling to Seattle for a 3-day trip. Hopefully, I'll stop by and meet you. Hopefully so. That'd be great. Make sure you say hi if you're in town. Let's see. Hi from Burlington. If you want to tell me what city you're in, that's great, but I'm not going to always pull them up on screen. I just did this one here because it's always fun to see somebody from Skagit County. Another funny comment here, too. Rye Guy, Bobby Ferguson's the reason why America needs fewer lawyers. It's true, because we certainly don't need more of them in the AG's office. Daniel, totally self-serving here. Yep, don't forget to subscribe and like. Always appreciate that. Let's see. Bradley the Builder, did you read the candidate statement by that Ram woman who's running for Cantwell's seat? I thought I was having a mental break. I didn't. But I'm assuming what you mean is there was a, Melram, yeah. The first, no, I didn't actually read that. But now that you've said that, I'm going to go back and have to read her statement and see what it is. That was a Republican running for office. No, I didn't read her statement. But she got 58,000 votes, 4.82% of the vote, running for federal Senate. So I'll have to find out what she said. Thanks for pointing that out. I blame Abel. Will you be running for any positions in the future? I don't have any plans right now to run for office anytime soon. Honestly, I think I don't have any interest at all in going to Washington, D.C. I never have. I spent time down there when I was a college activist in Washington, D.C., and I have friends, of course, that live there, and there's zero traction to me in going to the only reason you could ever convince me to go to Washington, D.C. is if I was actually going to have a position where I could chop the government down in a massive, significant, dramatic way, and downsize federal government. That would be fun. I would come back there for that, but no other reason other than to visit. I like the museums, and I have friends back there, but no interest in running for any office that would ever bring me back there. Love Washington State. If I was ever to run for office, it'd be in Washington State, doing something to help the state where I live in and the state I love. And even probably more likely, I could see getting involved in local government to address some local issues, maybe in the county. But right now, I have zero plans in running for office. I feel like I can achieve more doing what I'm doing right now, and so that's why I'm doing it. Let's see. Hello, what state are you talking about when you mean primary election? Washington State. Sorry, that wasn't clear. This video channel mostly deals with Washington State issues. And so when I'm talking about the primary, I'm talking about yesterday's primary, August 6th. So, Jason, you got a question. Will Republicans be able to come together and support Reichert? Well, for the most part, that's probably true. The bigger question sometimes is, will they unite to oppose Ferguson? That inevitably requires them to support Reichert, but a lot of it's also going to be an anti-Ferguson vote. I do believe Mark Mullet, who's a Democrat running in that primary, his 5 to maybe 6% of the vote is largely an anti-Ferguson vote that could very easily shift and get behind the Reichert campaign. You could easily see those people voting that way, but we'll have to see. Donald Larson, can we refer the bar judges and lawyers that, I'm assuming you meant that enact unconstitutional laws and regulations? Well, you could, but the Bar Association's corrupt from the beginning. It's very hyper-partisan. I don't really know. The bar's not going to do any good, so I don't know why people think the bar's like some. It's got all. I mean, it wasn't that long ago, actually, in Washington State, that the head of the Bar Association was actually arrested for fraud, and so the Bar Association has problems at the state level. Local county bars, some of them might be okay, but mostly they're very political at this point in time. Rachel's Ghost, will you share who you're voting for president in November? Sure, we have two choices. I mean, essentially two choices. You got others, but it's two major choices. Kamala Harris, right, and Walz, presumably, and Trump Vance. Between the two of them, I would vote for Trump for sure. I mean, no hesitation at all, especially if they actually do something to downsize the federal government. I'm always going to vote for the person that's going to try to downsize the federal government in some way over anybody else. And, you have people that are on the ballot, and then you have magical thinking that you wish you had some perfect person that doesn't exist out there on the ballot, and you deal with voting for the person that's actually on the ballot and working hard to try to find that better person in the future. Let's see. There's a question right here. Thunderstriker again, back again. Political question of the day number 5. What are the potential impacts of recent changes to voting laws and election administration on future U.S. elections? There's two different ways to look at that. There have been some minor, decent reforms in some states that will improve transparency, make it a little bit harder to cheat in some elections in some states. The general trend over the last 20 years, though, has been in the opposite direction, making elections less transparent, less auditable, the voter rolls more of a mess, and making it more difficult to ensure integrity in the election process. And specifically when I say that, I'm really talking about this lack of chain of custody on the ballots, especially associated with, and lack of transparency, therefore, as to what's happening with the ballots when it comes to mail-in voting in general, and then particularly crazy things like same-day voter registration, pre-registration of 16, 17-year-olds, signature matching systems that don't really work, registering people who are not citizens at the DMV and all kinds of other state agencies. All these things make it worse, making it very difficult to challenge and remove bad voters from the voter rolls, et cetera. All these things add up, and it'd be nice to change. Anyway, we'll see how it goes. People are going to write in Byrd for governor on the ballots. That's just a dumb move. Just so you know, the one person, there's going to be 26 people in Washington State that legally cannot be ever accepted as a write-in candidate on the ballot. And they are the 26 people who lose in the primary. It's the only person that really can't be a write-in candidate is somebody who loses in the primary. That's just, bad form and a total waste. So usually people I see pushing this idea are Democrats because they're trying to convince Republicans to do stupid things. But, we'll see. Nobody's perfect. But and there's somebody mentioned this, wishing I was fishing. Okay. Dave ain't perfect, better than Ferguson. That's true. And I'm going to tell you that Ferguson's pretty bad. So shocking the system by electing somebody in there that will be different, even if not perfect, even if not exactly what you're hoping for, is still much better. I'm just surprised at people's ignorance on this. There is a difference between putting Satan incarnate in there, right, whose entire history is about doing the most evil that he possibly can, and that's Ferguson, right? And then somebody else who may be a flawed candidate from your perspective, but they're going to probably be sane and normal and probably do far better things, or worst case scenario, just stop the worst things from happening. And again, it's usually about who they surround themselves with more than even just the candidate themselves. But I just think that's very important. Let's see. Dave for governor. Let me look down here. This isn't really a question, but it was something. My favorite Senate vote goes to Isaac Holyoke. We need to have a fresh, young voice. Let me see. Isaac got 5.47%. So obviously you weren't alone in thinking that was the case. He had zero money, so he raised no money at all for his campaign. The challenge is always, right, what that means when if you don't raise any money for a campaign, but you write a good voter's guide statement, you get out there. Somebody like that, if you got the interest in politics, start at a race that you can win. There's no scenario where this guy will ever win a statewide race, but he could probably get involved in a local school board race or city council race, and people get to see whether they actually do what they say they're going to do. Many times people run for office, they say all kinds of elaborate, exciting, unique, amazing things, and they get into office and they turn out there to be a disappointment. I'd rather learn that at the school board level, the city council race, than learn it for the federal Senate race, particularly when there's that much pressure on them. At the same time, you can discover if somebody's actually competent and capable. People are generally more likely to elect somebody or vote for them and elect them to office if they've got some kind of a history of not being a crazy person. They'll say, well, this guy's been on the school board 8 years. He hasn't molested any kids yet or stolen any money that I know of. He must be an okay guy. That may sound very shallow and limited, but the vast majority of people that are probably filling out that ballot, they aren't doing a hell of a lot of research. They're doing, it's kind of a last minute thing. They're busy with other things, job, concerned about their car breaking down, mowing the lawn, whatever it is, they're distracted. And voting is not something they spend a lot of time on. So they're going to make decisions sometimes differently than somebody that might be very into politics and still very focused. Rye guy, Idaho's still a very red state, and it does not matter. And this is the thing I think people have to realize, especially the states that have been red a long time, South Dakota, North Dakota, Idaho, Wyoming, Texas, places like that are typically where the crash occurs sooner because people that are Democrats in those states have been running as Republicans for generations. So they don't believe anything that you might believe as a Republican or a conservative. That was just what they had to call themselves to get into the political office and the power they aspire to. Given the opportunity, they'll oftentimes do policies that are identical to what Democrats will do in Washington state. And because they either clearly don't understand what they're talking about or what's going on, or they really don't believe what you and I believe in the first place. So you will not escape the fight that we're in this country. You can temporarily relocate where it seems better for a little while and then rapidly discover that everything you thought you were running away from is coming there as well. This is a fight that we have to win, county by county, city by city, state by state. Anyway, so that's just how it is, how it's going. I'm going to point out this. Crazy Inslee's going to retire to Idaho. People keep saying that. I don't see any evidence. Please show me the evidence. It's been a rumor as best I can see. Literally, I have no evidence on that. Let's see. Jason, is the media going to be able to paper over the Tim Walz baggage? Well, they'll sure try. So it's up to you and I and everybody else to get the truth out there about the weirdo Walz. And he is bad. I mean, imagine, it's funny, why would you go find a governor that's actually even worse than Inslee and then try to throw him on your ticket? I don't see the benefit that you get out of that. How much do you think the stock market going down now will affect the polls? I've heard some people panicking. I'm not worried about the panic, and the stock market doesn't affect a large percentage of the population. It does indirectly, but it's a metric that people understand, just like 1929 when the crash occurred, and really ever since then. And so people have measured, but the stock market isn't necessarily the economy. What I think affects the polls more than the stock market is cost of living, inflation, cost of fuel, the ability to pay your rent, the ability to buy groceries. That I think affects, and your ability to have a job, right? Those are the things that affect how people vote more than what the stock market does. That's my opinion. Alex Brown, why are you so anti-people leaving the state? Washington has been on a decline for decades. Its fate feels very sealed, and some of us don't want to live feeling like second-class citizens. Well, part of it is most people promoting the departure from the state aren't Republicans or conservative people anyway. Secondly, I have several friends now, probably almost a dozen, that have moved and now regret it. And the one thing that happens when you leave is that if you've lived here for any length of time, you've built up a friend network and a network around you politically that makes an impact. And they trust you, they know you, times are tough. They're people who can rely on because you've got a history with them. You move out of state, you're just the lib that just moved into the conservative town or whatever town you moved in, and you're a carpetbagger and they don't like you, and it takes years for them to get comfortable around you. And if something goes south, you don't have the support network that you'd built up so long here. It's much easier to make things happen here. The other thing that I do find is that Washington State's not as far gone as people think it is, but by promoting and trying to throw fuel on that fire, a lot of it's motivated not even there by leftists that keep pushing that, right? They want you to leave because it makes their life easier. The concerns that Democrats have had in Washington State is that they could lose the state. The leftists could lose the state. It's also it has so much more natural resources and opportunities and I almost feel like I should do a whole video on this, on the superiority of Washington State compared to almost any other state around. Now, I'm completely biased, but I love the state and I recognize the value that it represents. And I don't like flushing 4 generations of my family's work down the drain and all the other people who actually did good things to grow the state to where it is, just because you have a handful of crazies, particularly in Seattle, that come in and make something go south. Many states, conservatives have said in the past, are gone and done, and then suddenly they turn around, right? Something changes, and the right people come together and they turn it around. And you just have to do that. At some point in time, you do. You think you can run away from it, and it's just one of the most foolish ideas I've ever seen. Sometimes you do have to escape the city, right? You have to escape living in an environment which specifically is dangerous, but rural Washington is a great place to live, and still a great place to raise your kids, and there's a lot of benefit in living here. And so I just think it's a foolish approach. And again, I know a lot of people have tried, and it hasn't worked so well for them. First year I didn't receive a ballot, had to get a replacement in Tumwater, voted Republican across the board. Well, thank you, but I'm sorry you didn't get it. My friend watched a ballot box in Camado Island, and no one collected the ballots at 8:30 p.m. Whom should she contact? Wow, that's really important, actually. Contact your local auditor and let them know. That's pretty important if nobody collected it. Very important. So make sure you do that and file a formal notice. I mean, that has to be formally notified. I do it right now. Don't wait. Let's see. Karen Waters, clarifying here, Semi won't endorse Reichert because he didn't sign the pledge or bother to show up at the convention. It's fine. Listen, everybody's got their reason why they're not going to do it. I wouldn't. It's not what I would ever recommend somebody to do generically, but you can't control what people else do, what somebody else is going to do. Susan, what do you know about crosscheck? I don't think it's anything that's going to work. I'm semi-familiar with it. It requires a level of participation that it's never going to get in order to be effective at knowing for sure what statistical election results are. I'm a little concerned about the contract associated with it, but people are trying to go out and do different things. I don't. The funny thing is, on this one, I heard the ad on the radio and didn't even know what it was. I knew about crosscheck kind of independently. I'd heard the ad for weeks and didn't even realize what it was. It didn't make any sense to me. So I don't know that the ads that I've heard are correlating directly to whatever they want people to do here. But anyway, there's a lot of things going on out there, and I'm semi-familiar with it. It's just I don't know that it's going to achieve the things that we'd like it to be able to achieve. I went to PH Joy. I went to school with Dave Reichert's son. What should I say to Todd? Congratulations, I guess. I mean, his dad, I'm assuming you're talking to that Todd is his son. And obviously, if somebody gets through the primary and is moving on to the general, that's a success in the top 2 primary. Let's see. I don't think the party for the first time in a while. Yeah, I don't know. We'll have to see. Let's see. Susan, is it true that only 20% voted in the primary? Well, that was on election night. Right now, it's a little higher. And I would say, what are we up to now? 25% have voted. The reality is they've got another 600,000 plus. Again, the question is, are they above 35% when the final Met numbers come in or different? But remember, the numbers change as the mail-in, glorious mail-in voting system that we have and the post office and all of its wonder discover the mystery ballots that are still hanging out there, and they kind of trickle in. So it takes a while to actually get those numbers in, and then you'll finally know what the final numbers are. The couple of just trigger points, if you're above 35%, we're above the primary turnout in 2016. If you're above 40%, we're getting back to kind of like what an average normal primary election on a presidential cycle would be. If you're above 50%, you're getting close to the 2020 numbers, which were really high. So Donald Larson, great question. How do we get a grip on the activist judges? Number 1, expose them. Number 2, recruit people to run against them long in advance. There's a lot of rules around judicial races. It's not as easy as people think, but we got to start doing something because we have clowns on the benches, just like we do in public office elsewhere. Let's see. I'm trying to get to a question, guys. Jason, what are your thoughts on the Seattle police officer's lawsuit against being fired? Do you think it'll be successful? Actually, I do in that case. If we're talking about the same one, I think there's multiple lawsuits, but we're talking about the one guy who had a body cam video of him talking about an accident investigation I think he'd been involved in. If it's that guy, good chance of prevailing, actually. So we'll see. Jake Miller, I know this is a ways out, but do you expect anything interesting to happen when we switch to ranked choice voting in 2027? I don't think we're going to ranked choice voting in 2027, so I don't know where you've heard of that. But I'm sure it'll be a nightmare and you'll never be able to audit elections again. I hope we don't go there. Let's see, I saw a video Walz's wife was talking about how she openly supported the riots and opened her window to smell the burning tires. What are your thoughts on it? I know, I saw the same thing. Those are not the stories, just in case anybody doesn't know, that if you're running for political office with normal people, some percentage of normal people somewhere along the line are going to vote for you. Most normal people don't think riots, murder, as peaceful as they might be, burning down stores, destroying the urban environment, and burning tires in the streets. Most people are going to view that as positive and productive social activity. Outside of the Evergreen State College campus and Antifa down in Portland, that's generally going to not get a high percentage of people who think that's a good idea. So I'm not entirely sure why the governor's, I mean, those are not just so you know, that's not really what they want you to hear about them. Let's see. Yep, news is not actually reporting the truth. I believe that. Let's see. What about the political climate in Utah? Pauline, great question. I mean, Utah is considered another very conservative state. It's Republican, at times. They still do some dumb things in Utah, too. And the thing is, I see this happen sometimes. I was over at, Boise in Idaho, looking at some nutty, crazy things that the city council was getting ready to do there. And I realized that they actually had a couple of people who'd moved from Washington in there, pretending to be semi-conservative, and they were helping to direct the city going down the dumb paths that everyone here who's experienced it already knows are bad ideas. And so, anyway, that's just one of those issues that you can't, presuming that because you move somewhere and other people, I mean, I recognize, and I'm a rural living guy. I like to live rurally, and I like because I have some control over at least the environment around me. That's the theory. Neighbors that I know, neighbors within a mile, know everybody in a mile, family that lives next door, the ability to be fairly self-sufficient. I like that, and I think it makes sense. to move from an environment in which you're not self-sufficient into an environment that you're self-sufficient. Americans historically moved for a lot of reasons. Economic reasons were chief among them. And it's not uncommon to go back and read plenty of stories of Americans moving a long ways away, just like we did when people first came to America, to escape other places. So that'll happen. Safety reasons, financial reasons, economic growth reasons, I'm sure. Political reasons are dumb, generally, because you're just going to find out that you're putting your faith in other people and letting them dictate to you how to live, and then assuming that just because from the outside it looks like that place is nicer, it's a grass is always greener on the other side situation, and you land in it, and it turns out to not be quite as great as you thought it was. Let's see. Ben Garrett, here's a question, and I think that's good. Why would Harris choose, I'm sorry, it's concerning to see Ferguson polling so high, but at the same time, he's still below 50%, hovering around 45%. That is cataclysmic for the lead candidate who supposedly has a cakewalk to this position. It's not good for him at all. That's actually probably a fairly strong recognition that he's in trouble, provided that you get a unified opposition to him. A lot of those votes that Ferguson didn't get is because people don't like Ferguson. The question is, can Reichert capture those votes moving forward? We'll see. I know Serrano's way ahead. Another question from Ben, but he's pulling below 50%. Yes, that's a good point. Any chance he could win, and if so, what does he need to do to give himself the best shot? Well, he's going to have to reach out to people who care about freedom and liberty. And Nick Brown, that he's running against, is not probably a super aggressive campaigner. So he can out-campaign Nick, but he probably won't be able to out-fundraise him. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. David, I learned from you that money counts at the end of the day. I've never donated, but at the same time, money is tight and don't want to give to a campaign for it to lose. Well, nobody who does. You never know, right? But we'll just see, how things go. So money does count because you got to think of marketing, and marketing's part of that process. I'm going to take probably just 2 questions here because I realized that we are running late. There's a funny question here. I thought I'd jump in on this one. Rachel's goes, I don't think you live here, and you're asking me those questions. That's why. I'm actually a Republican PCO where I live. I do step on the toes of the Republican Party frequently and often, and on Republican politicians' toes periodically as well. I view myself as a liberty, freedom-oriented guy, and there is no liberty and freedom left in the Democrat Party of any kind. So the Republican Party is going to be the area where I try to shift things. I try to shift them more in that direction, smaller government, less government. That's who I am. Let's see. One of the candidates, there was somebody, here, Ben, yet another thing, just to mention this, because I did talk about my video you have coming up. 2 Republicans at this time still advancing in the Public Lands Commission race, which you mentioned there. I mentioned the 4th already, but that's actually potentially a big deal because acing out the Democrats in that race will be a pretty big deal, and that's good. Let's see, Ben, seriously, question, realistically speaking, what's the best case scenario for Republicans in November, Washington? Hopefully, at the very least, sane Democrats will win against the crazies. Well, most of the time, most of these races are going to be Republicans versus Democrats. So if they're in some of the primaries, sane Democrats did come out of it, and some of them, the worst Democrats came out, the crazies. So I think Republicans' best case scenario, number 1, the initiatives pass in November. That's a big deal. Number 2, that they get a couple of statewide positions. There's a few that are vulnerable. There's a few they could get. And that we get a good judge in the Supreme Court. We have one good guy coming through the primary that looks like he's got a pretty good shot, and that the Republicans pick up maybe 1 seat in the Senate and 3 to 4 or so in the House if things go well, maybe more, but just shifting in that direction would be good. I would anticipate that Republicans would view it very positively to pick up another congressional seat out here, and if something crazy happens, then you always have the potential to have a couple more shift in different directions. The numbers actually are smaller than you think, but we'll have to see. So with that, guys, I'm way past my time that I usually, in theory, try to close out these live streams at. I want to thank you. You guys had a lot of questions. There were a lot of people simultaneously online, and it is the post-primary election. You will see my video launch. I'm probably going to stay here, get it launched, or launch it in the morning tomorrow. basically just given my overview, some of which will be repetitive to what you saw here today. Some it'll be different. It was a longer video than I normally do, but it is the primary election of 2024, and if I don't do it, you might as well. I don't know anybody else that's doing it exactly the way I do. Let me know what you think about them. Share it with others if you think this is relevant or useful to you at all. And don't forget to encourage people to support We the Governed, and I will see you next time.